birkaç terimi şey yapalım. Carbon avoidance dendiği zaman aslında karbon salımını engellemiş olmak. Bu mesela yenilenebilir enerji santralleri. Bize çok sık gelen sorulardan bir tanesi değerli katılımcılarımızdan. Bu I-REC sertifikası 1 megawatt saat yenilenebilir enerji olduğunu gösteriyor. Neden bunun bir karbon karşılığı yok sorusu. İlk önce bu soruyla başlamak istiyorum. So, short description. You already know why we made this session. Just to repeat important parts of our presentations. Like one of them is why I-REC doesn't calculate carbon avoidance value. I would like to ask this to you first, Jared. Maybe Oleg would like to add some, maybe Travis and Ed can also add some point of view from what they have explained with Sea Capsule project.
So, Sean, you wanted to translate what I was going to say?
I will do.
That's not going to work because I've got way too much to say about it. So we'll do our best.
I will summarize, of course.
Okay, you can summarize. You can try. Why don't we do carbon avoidance? I think first, so Travis just did a good example of what carbon avoidance is. It means something that essentially isn't there. Measuring something that isn't there is pretty hard because it isn't there. So it's not like you can say that it's measurable. I mean, you need to know first what potentially would have been there to know what isn't there. So that means you're already looking into a crystal ball. You're already saying, okay, what would have been there if we didn't take the action? And then, okay, we didn't take that action, so what is now avoided? So looking into that crystal ball is something that is not in the principles of the I-REC standard. The I-REC standard, as I mentioned in my presentation, is ex post, meaning that it's always based upon audited facts after the fact. It's fact-based, meaning that you can always check it. It's verifiable with your own eyes, with the documentation. And it's agnostic, meaning we don't have a specific vision related to what would have happened, what is good, what is bad, or anything like this. So the entire concept of having something avoided means first you need to know what that would have been there. That's called in the a lot of terminology a business as usual. But I-REC doesn't have a business as usual, or the products that adhere to the I-REC standard, the International Attribute Tracking Standard, don't have a business as usual because it's all based upon after the fact. So there is no business as usual. If the wind turbine explodes and there's not making any wind anymore, any megawatt hours, it's also not going to get a certificate, even though a business as usual would have potentially said, hey, that wind turbine, it's got a 20-year lifetime, it's going to be producing electricity for the next 20 years based upon this business as usual. But the I-REC methodology, as it is ex post, and it's after the fact, and it's audited, and it's verifiable, and it's fact-based, is saying, we don't care what the expectations of that wind turbine are, we measure based upon the reality that's happening. So this avoided emissions versus kind of fact-based audited emissions is kind of a core element in these markets that is taking more and more responsibility and is becoming more and more recognized by entities. They are less willing to accept a business as usual average because especially when you're talking about a wind turbine producing for 20 years, that might be easy. But when you're talking about the entire emissions of an entire grid or an entire energy system, we can see how hard it is to say a business as usual average, just looking at anything that happened in the last 5 years. Almost, I would actually love to see a lot of the reports from 2020, or from 2000, to say where the energy mix was going to be in 2020, how off they were. They're definitely not correct because it's impossible to look into the future. So looking at things at such a big scale, it's really hard to do. And that's why the I-REC standard focuses on what has happened in reality, and we monitor that.
You have 10 words.
İşte bunlar böyle şeyler. Şöyle, yani biz gerçekleşmeyeni nasıl ölçebiliriz? Güzel bir soru aslında. Ben de bundan sonra bunu kullanacağım. Gerçekleşmeyeni ölçüyoruz. Yani onu engelledi ama neyi engellediğini daha ölçemedik. IREX standart olarak bundan uzak duruyoruz. Çünkü en önemli şey yarattığımız sistemlerde, kayıt sistemlerinde de ölçebilmek en önemli noktalarımızdan bir tanesi. Zaten bu tartışmanın sonuna devam edeceğiz. Eğer bu konuyla ilgili araştırırsanız ECG fonları var. Bu ECG fonları zaten karbon sertifikalarının en büyük talebinin sebebi. Şirketler hedefleri doğrultusunda karbon emisyonlarını azaltmak için karbon engelleme kredileri, avoidance kredilerini kullanıyorlar şu anda. Ama yarın bir gün bu ECG fonlarında da böyle bir değişime gidileceği neredeyse kesin gözüyle bakılıyor. Çünkü bu yönde bir baskı var. Daha değerli, gerçekten ölçülebilen, saklanabilen karbonun ölçülmesi ve ticaretin yapılması gerçekten Travis'in sunumunda gösterdiği gibi iklim değişikliği hedeflerini tutturmak için daha elzem gözüküyor. Do you have anything else to add?
Maybe a short comment. You might have gotten a perception after all of our presentations, especially my colleagues' detailed presentations, that IREC is doing this and IREC is doing that. But specifically on your question, for example, regarding the IREC for electricity, we do not aspire to do all things with one tool. That's just beyond the vision and beyond the mandate that we have as a tracking standard specifically for electricity. There is a certain tool for a certain task, like carbon removals and like the certificate for the origin of the energy, in this case renewable energy. So that is partially the answer to your question why. It is a tool for scope 2 emissions in particular, and it should be a good tool, a developed tool, but it shouldn't be a tool for everything.
So the next question, we will repeat some parts. What differentiates carbon removals from carbon offsets? Actually, we have also explained that comparing IREX standard to carbon avoidance calculations. But maybe you would like to add something, Travis?
Yeah, I can comment on that. Is the mic working? You guys can all hear me? Perfect. So as Jared was mentioning, the key difference between an offset and which is a carbon avoidance and a carbon removal certificate relates to these fact-based ex post principles that are set by the standard. So traditional offsets are often issued on an ex ante basis against a business as usual baseline, which is a counterfactual. Whereas a carbon removal certificate, we can issue off verifiable, measurable evidence. And that's the key difference. With a carbon removal certificate, we are going to be issuing verified historical facts, whereas a traditional carbon offset, it's issued before the activity has actually taken place. Particularly in the case of nature restoration projects, you could be buying an ex ante credit which says, you've neutralized your emissions because a tree has been planted. That tree may not have actually been planted yet and may not even reach the level of sequestration promised in the ex ante credit because of wildfires, forest management, disease, pest, all these things. And that's the key difference really. We're trying to issue facts rather than assumptions.
Travis başka güzel bir örnek verdi. Mesela orman projeleri, biz bir orman projesi yapıyoruz ama bu orman projesindeki ağaçların daha büyümeden ya da işte 10 yıl boyunca ne kadar karbon azaltacağını hesaplayarak yola çıkıyoruz diyor. Ama diyor bu orman yangını olduğu zaman belki o 10 yıllık yaptığımız hesaplamanın bir önemi kalmayacak. Carbon removal'larla carbon offset'lerin arasındaki en önemli farkı yine aynı şekilde vurguluyor. Bir tanesi ölçülebilir gerçekten, diğeri ölçülemiyor. Geçmişteki bir noktayla bugünkü nokta arasındaki farkı alarak bir hesaplama yapılıyor diyor. This one is more like combining. So, şimdi birazcık konular karışacak. Hepsini karıştıran bir soru. So, what's the importance of registries in the light of new projects such as green hydrogen, carbon removals? How do we integrate them between each other as well? Do we use them together at some point? Yeah, different databases can interact with each other.
I think ultimately they all have to talk with each other, whether that is through a single registry that might have multiple products and that is well integrated, or as you will probably see in Europe, you will have different registries doing different things, and somebody's got to find a way to make them work together. Because hydrogen will need evidence on methane emissions. It will need evidence on electricity supplies. It will need evidence on carbon storage. And there may be other elements that have to be brought into that calculation at some point in the future as well that we don't know of at the moment. So somehow all of that has to come together. And for us, with IREC and our work with a foundation that covers multiple products, it makes sense for us to demonstrate how we can bring all of that together in one place. But we could also just do part of the solution. And that's a key thing with IREC, that if one country says, we have a standard already for methane reporting. It's not a standard that we use in IREC, but we would accept that and integrate that in. And that's an important thing. Nobody is likely to be in a position to do everything. We have to be able to talk with each other.
Hidrojen konusunda evet vurgulamamız gereken konu şu, ilginç bir tedarik zinciri. Bir elektrik kısmı var. Ondan sonra metan kısmı var. Metanın kullanılması sırasında ne kadar karbon emisyonu yapılıyor. Ardından karbon yakalama teknolojisi de buna eklenebilir. Şimdi bu üç teknolojinin her biri ayrı bir kayıt sistemine sahip olduğu zaman bunlar birbiriyle nasıl konuşacak? Bu nedenle kesinlikle diyor Evident'in CEO'su olarak Ed, biz bu sistemlerin bir defa birbiriyle konuşabileceği bir mimari üzerine çalışıyoruz. Ama diğer taraftan diyor buna engel olmamız da mümkün değil. Her ülkenin farklı kuralı olacak ve o ülkelerin kurallarına göre de o ülkenin damgasını vurabileceğimiz bir izleme sistemi eklememiz gerekiyor diyor ve bunun üzerine çalışıyoruz diyor. Tekrar bugün aslında bu kayıt sistemlerinin öneminden bahsederken bunu vurgulamak istiyorduk. Bu işin temelindeki en önemli konulardan bir tanesi, garantisini sağlayan şey aslında oradaki IT yapısı. Okay, this one. Which carbon offsets will be attractive to ECG funds? So it's like you are all following news, you are all attending meetings, so you see those funds and you follow their news. And what's your take on the latest news on what should the sustainability department of companies in here be aware of when choosing products, let's say?
Okay. I think what we've seen over the last few years, and there's been a lot of discussion around the use of offsets and a lot of negative press about offsets. And one of the reasons we look at reduction and removal differently than offset is how impact is measured. So an offset is going to a football match and watching somebody save a shot. Nobody scores. Whereas a removal is somebody scoring a goal. You've achieved something positive. And that's why with Sea Capsule our focus is very much on removals. When we look at what funds are looking to invest in, they are starting to move away from offset projects and look towards removals. And I think, Travis, do you want to add?
So, as I mentioned, the carbon offset market today is avoidance and reduction only. But in the future, it's just going to be solely carbon removal. High durable carbon removal. We need 10 gigatons by 2050. and it's a very small niche group of buyers today. Some of the early front runners in terms of procurement of carbon removal is Microsoft, Alphabet, Shopify, Stripe, and there's very limited supply. But as soon as we're able to certify carbon removal in a robust and reliable manner, turn it into a tradable instrument, we can start channeling finance into these projects that can scale and ultimately create the carbon market for the future, which will be dominated by highly durable carbon removal projects.
So in the essence, actually, these certificates, both renewable energy certificates and carbon removal certificates, are aiming at the investor to get a support on return on invest, and then they can invest more, and then we can have an impact in the transition, indeed. So with the offsets, actually, it's not causing continuous acceleration in the transition, let's say. So I think these are my common questions. Now I can ask our guests if they have any questions for you, because today's sessions are over now. Just one more presentation from me, and then it will be over. Sorunuz var mı? Buyurun.
Regarding the product certification of IRXide, for example, we have one product composed not only with aluminum or steel or cement, whatever, but we have some part of aluminum inside, and we declare that our production is sustainable. And we use maybe 100% or maybe 90, 80 or 50% of renewable energy. So is it possible for us to declare and secure IRX certificate on product basis?
So right now, that's asking about a product verification. So verifying that a product itself has used renewable electricity as part of the basis of the product itself. And this is something that as a foundation is a next step for us. It's not something we're doing right now. Right now, we're looking at the kind of core elements that are included into your product. So for example, the electricity, the carbon removals, the hydrogen, and we're verifying that so you can redeem that against your product. So in either way, that is the first step. The first step is to know what is going into your product, and that what is going into your product is measured the same way as other products. And then the second step is what you're asking about, is we have a specific product, whether it's aluminum or steel or a combination of different materials, and we want to prove to you that our product is 100% renewable. And this is a phase that we're talking about within the IREX Standard Foundation, because it is a next step. It's something different than what we're doing now, because what we're doing now, actually, we don't care necessarily what your actual consumption is. You can buy more or less renewable electricity than you want. You can adhere to different accounting periods. There's a lot of different ways to do that. But moving to that product certification is something we're looking at. But at the same time, we would like a basis for doing that, because we can do that ourselves. Of course, Photon can do that as well. This is something that Photon is looking into developing as well. And we support our stakeholders like Evident, like Photon, in developing these types of verifications as well. So we want to work with organizations like them, but also PwC or KPMG or all these organizations that are auditing companies to audit that as well. So it's a bit of a two-front for us right now as an organization. Where do we step in to do that? And where do we allow others the room to do that as well? And I think for us as a foundation, what we would want is very clear rules and regulations to allow for that to take place. So imagine that the European Union says for steel to be considered renewable, it has to adhere to all these various requirements. Then it would be possible maybe for the IREX standard to build on top of that. So it's a big question, and I don't have a yes or no answer for you right now, as you can see. So what I can tell you is that everything that goes into your product, of course, we're working on that. That's what we're talking about here today. But then looking at your product itself and saying how much electricity did it use, how much did you consume, all those various elements. That's a much bigger question that we still need to ask ourselves. Is that our role as a foundation? Is it the role of other market players and market facilitators? Or what would be the requirements and boundaries for something like that?
Thank you.
Teşekkürler. Benim 2 tane sorum var aslında. Birincisi mesela CDP gibi kuruluşlar bu CDR'ı kabul edecek mi? Çünkü karbon offsetlemeyi kabul etmiyor. İkincisi de Evident'ta yanlış bastığımız sertifikalarda bir değişiklik düzenleme gibi bir uygulama gelecek mi? Gerçekten çok zorlanıyoruz o konuda. Bunları soracaktım. Teşekkürler.
There is a question for you. So, she says CDP doesn't accept carbon offsets at the moment, and will they accept CDRs?
Yes. Yeah, that's the transition that is currently underway. An SBTI, which I think is an offshoot of CDP. Yeah. They have said that if you want to offset or neutralize your residual emissions, so once you've reduced all of your Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions, the idea is for those hard-to-abate sectors where you can't reduce those emissions because the technologies aren't there to make those reductions, then you'd have to use a carbon removal certificate to neutralize those residual emissions. And as I mentioned, the current offsets that are in the market today won't satisfy that quality threshold. And SBTI will be looking for high durable carbon removal as well, so less about nature restoration, more about direct air capture, bioenergy capture and storage, biochar, these sorts of methodologies that can evidence high durability over a 100-year time horizon.
Oldu mu? Büyük ihtimalle bunu kabul edecekler çünkü diyor hani ölçülebilir karbon saklama teknolojisi kullanılacak burada. Ölçülebildiği için zaten bunun üzerine toplantılar oluyor diyor. Tabii orada başka bir kritik konu daha var. Bizim aslında sakladığımız karbon da bir şekilde dışarı çıkıyor. Orada bazı katsayılar ve kaç yıl için saklanabildiğinin hesaplanması lazım. O metodolojilerden tekniğine girdiği zaman ben de kayboluyorum. Ama bilahare buna çalışıp anlatacağım. Zaten yepyeni bir konu. Evet. So this actually, she constantly asked me maybe some beneficiaries don't know it here, but for sure the participants, on the redemption statements, when they make a mistake, they cannot change it, and they're asking if you are looking forward to change it later. I mean...
Yes. So with the redemption statement, if there is an issue, contact us. Okay? We have to look very, very carefully at every request, and we look at them individually if there is an issue with the redemption statement. We can, look at things and see what we can do. We can't guarantee. And the reason we don't guarantee is because we have seen in other markets organisations use a redemption statement to try and then issue to 2 or 3 different organisations. Now, we've been very careful in that process to make sure that that can't happen. But if there is a genuine error, then contact us and we will do what we can to assist.
Buradaki bir diğer konu hazır son tüketicilerimiz de burada. Şirketin ismini büyük harfle mi istiyoruz, küçük harfle mi istiyoruz? Adreste bir değişiklik var mı? Birden fazla bu noktayı istiyoruz. Yardımcı olursanız şirketlerimize sonra değiştirilemiyor. Ya da değiştirilmesi çok uzun sürüyor. I also explained beneficiaries that they should be careful when giving information to their participants. Yes. Başka soru var mı?
I'm not sure, is there any project in the gold standard or VERA platform about carbon removal. I'm not sure. But if there is any, can the same project be registered C capsule and also to the others? So, I mean, if there is any price difference between these systems, I think it will be a consideration in near term, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, so on the first question, Vera actually, within the last few weeks, released their first carbon removal methodology for biochar. And on your second question, yes, we want to allow that flexibility for projects to register against multiple standards and registries. That's what we've seen in the IREX space, when a project registers both for the carbon offset and also the IREX scheme. We just need to make sure that there's no double issuance of the megawatt hour and carbon avoidance, and in the case of carbon removal, that for no single metric ton of carbon removal, it's issued twice on 2 separate registries. And that's why we need to start engaging more with the likes of Vera and Gold Standard as these carbon removal methodologies emerge. We need to have greater dialogue and transparency between the various different registries so that we can ensure there is no double counting, no double issuance.
Yep. And just following on from that, with some of the other standards for carbon offsets in particular, because they have every role, they set the standard, they are the registry, they are the issuer, they're often involved in sort of facilitating the transactions. It is really important for us that what we do as evident and with C Capsule remains independent of the value chain. So we work to an independent standard. We have independent issuers. We have an independent registry. We are now a member of IETA, and we are working with IETA on methods to ensure that there is coordination between registries that allows organisations to have flexibility in the future.
Evet, başka soru var mı? Burada önemli konulardan bir tanesi aslında şu, bu bize de çok sık gelen bir soruydu. Gold Standard'a ya da Verra'ya kayıtlı bir proje IREC'e kayıt olabilir mi? Olabilir ama şu önemli. Sertifika oluşturduğu dönemde karbon sertifikası oluşturulmaması lazım. Karbon sertifikası oluşturduğu dönemde de IREX sertifikası oluşturulması lazım. Bunun kontrollerini yapabilmek için zaten bütün bu gruplar beraber çalışıyoruz. Açık diyalog halinde. Başka soru var mı?
Hello. My question is more like the registry side. So, are you considering using some blockchain technology for your registry?
Our registry uses very similar methods to blockchain that we designed over 20 years ago. Blockchain doesn't solve any of the problems that we need solving within the registry. If anything, it makes some of what we do more difficult. We have been working with Energy Web Foundation now for nearly 5 years, and we have good integration with the blockchain. But for the purpose of a registry, blockchain doesn't really suit it as a technology. And we've seen that. We work with registry operators in North America and across Europe on harmonization of standards. And we are almost entirely agreed that the purpose of blockchain is for functions that are outside of what we do within a registry at the moment. But we remain open always at looking at the best available technology. But we already have an immutable ledger.
If I could just jump in really quick, I'd say from the perspective of a foundation, a majority of our problems are policy related and not technology related. Now, it's important to have a robust technology that is suitable for the needs of end users and the expectations of stakeholders. And that's, of course, what Evident and other market facilitators are doing, including Photon with market platforms and providing innovation there. But a majority of our restrictions, you could say, the reason that sometimes we're a little bit held back is policy. And the technology solution doesn't solve necessarily the policy problem. Of course, a technology solution can benefit in a lot of different ways, and we leave that again to stakeholders like Photon to implement blockchain with their market platforms. It's something we support fully. We support fully as well that Evident uses technology that's right for them, that is adherent to the IRIC standard again, so that's a critical element. They're all accredited to the IRIC standard, but it's really for us policy, and policy and technology are not the same problem.
This is a really good topic actually, because I see also Photon as a kind of a test project to show the use case to Evident and IREC. We are also experiencing by ourselves, like on blockchain, when you make a mistake, you cannot get it back. So also some of our platform participants are also experienced, I guess, that's why they are laughing. But yeah, but these experiences are also very valuable because that doesn't mean that what blockchain enables us further to increase the amount of interested parties to reach out these special niche markets that will grow these markets and cause the acceleration of the transition as well.
And I think blockchain can enable rapid solution development in many parts around what we do with the registry. But coming back to the problem of solving an error, we can solve an error. We still have an immutable ledger. The error always exists, and the correction will always exist. And with how we've developed our ledgers, we do have that flexibility that is more difficult to implement with blockchain. It's still possible with blockchain, but it's a bit more difficult.
Operational risks are higher. The person that is entering the name, if they make a mistake, is immutable. So, yes. Okay. Any other question? Başka soru var mı? Yoksa yavaştan kapatacağım. 5 dakikamız daha var gibi. O zaman arkada var bir tane. This is for you, Jared. Hard one, of course. You came all the way to Turkey, and I was always directing, when they were asking me about these redemption fees, I was telling them it's up to IREC Foundation. So
the fee structure more generally is designed in a specific way. It was done together with stakeholders like Evident, who can say more about that as well, to indeed encourage innovation locally as well. So the entire governance structure of the IREC standard, and of course the associated fee structure as well, is made in a way to be one, avoid fraud and avoid problems with other market players, two, to encourage innovation, and three, to encourage local development. This is how we get local issuers involved. And local issuers are critical for the development of an international standard. In the end, we are an international standard that is locally implemented. So we need to create revenue locally as well for the work of issuers, because the work they're doing is critical and the work they're doing is important. At the same time, the foundation, the work of Oleg and myself and my team also needs to be supported. This is largely supported from redemption fees. So redemption fees are being used, of course, by the registry provider, but also by the foundation. And that's kind of how these have been built up over time. Now, I don't want to speak for the commercial aspects associated with the level of the fee. That's more for Evident. And of course, talking about fees is always a challenge in general as well. But what I would say on this is, again, not speaking for commercial fees, but these haven't been raised ever. They've only ever been lowered since the history of the IREC standard, the redemption fees. The reality is that it's in many markets a very, very small percentage of what the certificate is. Sometimes in other markets it's a larger percentage. So it depends upon how you look at it across the entire infrastructure. What the foundation has been reluctant to allow is different fees for different markets, because it does an unfair justification between markets. And that it creates tension between markets themselves which is separate from the actual underlying certificate. So that is an important element that we've been cognizant of in the past as well, trying to keep as fair of a market for all stakeholders, all issuers, all market players, and not just market players in Chile, but also market players in Singapore and in Turkey and everywhere else. So we have to look at this on a global stage, and that makes it indeed a bit of a challenge sometimes when we look at it locally.
Yani kısaca burası zor. Ya şöyle söyleyeyim, ben daha önceden açısından açıklamıştım pek çoğunuza. Yani bütün derneğin giderleri, bütün bu IT tarafının geliştirilmesine gidiyor buradaki bütçe. Bu bütçe düşünüldüğü zaman bir ülkeden diğer ülkede farklılık yapamıyorlar çünkü öyle bir durumda bir ülkeden diğer ülkeye haksızlık olmuş oluyor. Şu anda böyle ilerliyoruz. Başka soru? Ama bence biraz daha sıkıştırabiliriz drinks'te.
I think it's also worth drawing a comparison to the cost of maybe a VER certificate and going through that process. But when you look at the overall costs for IREC, they are significantly lower than offset costs in terms of registration fee, issuing fees, and sort of life cycle cost. And that's a really important thing. The other aspect is that with IREC there is continual investment, and that's a key thing of why it's important to keep investing the revenues that are there, because we're having to build infrastructure that's got to last for decades. The IREC Foundation, Photon, Evident, all the other issuers, we are building environments that have to exist for decades, and that needs a lot of investment.
Onlarca yıldan beri devamlı bunu yatırıma dönüştürdük. Hem altyapı olarak hem de çalışanlar olarak diyor Ed ve şunu söylüyor. Diğer karbon offset projelerinin kayıt, işte sertifikalandırma bedellerini de göz önünde bulundurarak, yani tabii maliyetleri de ve onları da göz önünde bulundurarak belirlediğimiz bir fiyatlama. Onlarla kıyaslandığı zaman hala da IREC tabii ki çok çok daha az bir maliyeti var. Bunun da sebebi ölçülebilir olması. En önemli sebeplerinden bir tanesi. Evet, o zaman sıradan herkese teşekkür edeceğim. Jared, thank you very much for coming all the way to Turkey to present us valuable information on hydrogen, and then also the CBAM. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ed,
Jan, just a quick one. Filling the questions in the room, I think for the next event we should definitely consider involving more voluntary reporting standards such as RE100 and SBTIs themselves.
yes.
Because you might have noticed we are drawing a bit of borders into what our function is, what our role is, and what their role is. So I think the next logical step is that for the next IREC event in Istanbul, hopefully soon, we'll also have them.
I'm actually surprised because most of the time IREC Foundation was not replying on these questions usually. We were saying it's not our duty, but now I think because the whole world is asking continuously these questions, we are more openly answering. But indeed, I will also mention that. Ed, thank you very much. After how many years been back? 15, 20?
Yeah, about 15 years.
15 years. And you haven't visited in between?
No.
Really?
Nope.
You really just fed up with doing your project in Turkey.
I was trying
15
to
years
lose the
ago.
weight after the food.
Thank you very much being here with us. Oleg, yeah, he has joined IREC like a year now.
Well, it's almost 2 years already.
2 years. We have been working. He's amazing. Thank you very much for being
Jan.
here. I think you will visit more often.
I hope so.
Travis, thank you very much. I think we will need to find out the Turkish translation of the terms first,
Yep.
and then
Sorry.
try it again.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, so many people are wondering the differences between these concepts,
Mhm.
and you were just fabulous explaining. Thank you very much. Before the drinks, I was planning to make a presentation, but maybe it's better in Turkish, very short. Bugün aslında Fotoneko'yu da lansmanını yapmak istedik. Fotoneko aslında Avrupa'da ve dünyada yeni çıkan bir konsept, bir etiket programı. Bugünkü davette de %50 elektrik üretim ve tedarik şirketleri, %50 de sanayi son kullanıcı, elektriğin son kullanıcılarını davet etmemizin sebebi buydu. Bize çok sık gelen sorulardan bir tanesi, ben %100 yenilenebilir enerji kullanıyorum ama bunu gösteremiyorumdu. Bir başka sorun da şuydu, çatımda güneş enerji sistemi var ama çatımdaki güneş enerji sisteminin ne kadar elektrik ürettiğini ayırıp sertifikalandırma sürecine girmem gerekiyor. Tabi burada bir sürü detay var, teknik detay. Bunu ispat edecek bir üçüncü tarafa, denetleme kuruluşuna ihtiyacımız var.